Imagine seeing your first tornado without wasting years on busted forecasts and dodging hail as a total newbie. You've dreamed of witnessing nature's fury up close and personal, but chasers like Reed Timmer nail the forecast while others drive in circles. What gives? Well, they've mastered the tiny details that lead to success in storm chasing. It's kind of like a pro athlete who practices endlessly until every move is instinctual. But you've just started, so how can you get to that level? Years of trial and error and busting and danger. That's a pretty big bummer if you don't have a lot of time to spare. But what if I told you there's a way to level up with zero experience? It's true. Let's get into it. For those who don't know me, I am meteorologist and storm chaser Gabe Garfield, and I've been chasing storms for over 25 years. I've tracked over 200 tornadoes, including 7 EF4s and 2 EF5s. Today, I'm handing you my 6-step framework for becoming an elite chaser faster than you think. We're focusing on chasing supercells, the storms that produce 70% of tornadoes. They tower up to 60,000 feet and produce virtually all F4 and F5 tornadoes. Stick around, this is the blueprint that I wish I had when I started out. Once you have it, you'll be able to skip the mistakes that I made. Let's dig in. A quick word of caution, don't wing it. Storm chasing is thrilling, but it is dangerous. At least 4 chasers have died in tornadoes since chasing began, and 1 died because he didn't have enough prep. These deaths are rare, but they do happen, most often stemming from poor positioning. Okay, are you ready to get into it? Let's break it down. We'll find out why supercells are a goldmine for tornadoes. Step 1, learn how supercells form. We're starting with supercells because they produce most major tornadoes and are fairly predictable. What are supercells? Well, they're basically rotating thunderstorms, generally at least 10 miles across, sometimes as tall as 60,000 feet. And it's amazing to see these in real life. Supercells reliably bring together 2 things that tornadoes need: spin and stretch. When you think about spin and stretch, you can think about an ice skater. When she's on the ice and she's spinning, if she brings her arms in, she starts to spin faster. In the atmosphere, you can think of the spin like a mesocyclone. Okay, that's the apparent rotation in a supercell thunderstorm. If it's large and broad, maybe it's spinning slowly, but if it starts to contract, that is what happens with stretching, by the way. It starts to bring in that radius, and once that radius comes in, it starts to spin faster and faster until it produces a tornado. That's why supercells produce so many tornadoes, because they put the ingredients that tornadoes need, namely spin and stretch, together with high frequency. So then the question is, how do you get a supercell? The answer is by having all of the supercell ingredients. If you're baking cookies, you need a certain amount of flour and sugar and so forth, chocolate chips, let's say, and then you put them all together in a certain measure, and voila, after some time in the oven, you've got beautiful warm cookies. And similarly, if you have just the right ingredients for supercells, then you're going to get a supercell. So knowing tornado ingredients is kind of like a superpower in tornado chasing, because if you know all of the ingredients by heart, then you can look at the ingredients in any given place and know what's there and know what's missing, or where most of the ingredients are, or where all of them are. And that can help you to locate a tornado, or maybe some days to decide, I'd rather stay at home because I'm probably not going to see a tornado. So the key action here is to memorize the supercell ingredients. And the first ingredient is moisture. And moisture is basically that air you can wear, that muggy feeling that you get on those big storm days. The main measure for moisture is dew point temperature. The higher this is, the more energy the atmosphere has for supercells. And really, you're looking for dew points that are above 60. Now, sometimes you can get tornadoes in the 50s, but typically you're looking for at least 60. And if you get to 70, that's pretty amazing. The number 2 ingredient is instability. You can think of instability in a couple ways. The number 1 way may be like a boiling pot of water, right? If you have a lid on the boiling pot of water, it's unstable, the vapor wants to come up and it's held back by the lid. Now, if you pull off the lid, then the steam goes rising and it releases that instability. It's basically the same thing in the atmosphere. You can think of it also like a hot air balloon. The hotter the air is inside the balloon, the higher it will rise, and faster too. And that's because of the density differences between the inside of the balloon and the outside. And the main measure for instability is convective available potential energy. And generally speaking, you're looking for CAPE, as it's called, of at least 1,000 joules per kilogram. Sometimes you can go lower, again, kind of like the dew point thing, but generally you want above 1,000. And if you get above 3,000, that's pretty impressive. Above 5,000, that's wild. Some days like the Gerald Texas F5 day in 1997 had CAPE above like 6,000 or 7,000 joules per kilogram. Really amazing stuff. But generally speaking, at least 1,000 is what you're looking for. And that leads us to our next ingredient, the third ingredient, which is wind shear. The name suggests a shearing effect, which is basically a differential motion. You can think about scissors. Sometimes they're called shears, right? Because the scissors have different motions, kind of the same thing with wind shear. And it refers to a change in wind speed and direction with height. So as you go up in height, the wind speed changes and usually gets stronger when you have wind shear, and it also changes in direction. If you have both of those, that's called speed shear and directional shear. The most important measures for wind shear are deep layer shear and storm relative helicity. So deep layer shear kind of refers to just taking the difference in the winds between two levels, generally over a big part of the atmosphere. That's why they call it deep layer. And the higher the number, the more likely it is that you're going to get a supercell. Now, storm relative helicity, basically an integration of how much the wind speed and direction change with height. It's a much more full measure, let's say. And that's much more important, particularly in the lowest part of the atmosphere for predicting tornadoes. You're generally looking for values greater than 100 meters squared per second squared for tornadoes. And by the way, for deep layer shear, you're probably looking at least 30 knots is what you'd like to see for supercells to form. And the final supercell ingredient is lift. Basically, if you have the other three ingredients, but you don't have lift, you're not going to get a storm, because lift is what provides the motion that initiates thunderstorm development. So you can think of it, remember that lid that we were talking about on the boiling pot of water? It's what lifts that lid off, and that causes the rising steam. And the steam can transform the rotation in the atmosphere into a vertical, and that creates a supercell, right? So you need the lift. Lift is basically rising air. So if you're looking for lift, you can look at it on a kind of a large scale, looking for where storm systems are coming in that can create kind of subtle lift, or you can have dry lines that can create stronger lift, and then storms can even create lift of their own as the outflow goes out from the storm sometimes, and then it interacts with other outflow and it creates a convergence and then creates another storm. So there are multiple sources of lift in the atmosphere. If you want to know more about supercell ingredients, threshold values, what's needed for a supercell, and where to find that information, check out my tornado forecasting cheat sheet. It is in the link below, and it's also in the description. By the way, it's really important that you know these ingredients super well, so that when you're out chasing, you're not out there trying to figure things out in the field, but you're almost instinctual about it. You know exactly where to go. And how do you do that? Well, a good way to do that is by studying past outbreaks to see what parameters were there for those events. You can look at Storm Prediction Center's Severe Thunderstorm Events page and go through that and study those. Now, I will say that even if you know what supercell ingredients are, you won't get very far if you don't know how to read the weather charts, which brings us to our next step, which is to master weather charts. Learning how to read weather charts kind of sounds boring. It sounds a little bit like homework, but if you know how to do it, you're going to be ahead of most chasers, to be honest. And really, it's like X-ray eyes for the atmosphere. You know exactly where to go to find tornadoes. Of course, if you don't know how to do it, you're going to struggle out there. We're going to focus on just 4 weather charts: a surface chart, upper air chart, skew-T, and hodograph. Now, the surface chart, that is, as the name suggests, looking at the surface. So surface temperature, surface dew point, surface pressure, the wind speed and direction at the surface. And this helps you to locate boundaries like the dry line, the warm front, the cold front, sometimes outflow boundaries. Pretty important stuff. The next is the upper air chart. This helps you to determine where rising motion will occur and where wind shear will be sufficient for supercells. And then you'll need to know the skew-T log P. Now, the skew-T is basically a vertical profile of temperature and moisture. And it gives you a good sense of how much moisture, which is one of our ingredients, is there for supercell thunderstorms, and also how much instability, which gives you a good sense of how much rising motion potential there is. Think about the hot air balloon effect, think about the pot of boiling water. That you can determine through a skew-T log P. And finally, you'll need to master the hodograph. The hodograph is a very, very important chart, and it's basically a polar coordinate chart that helps you to understand how wind shear is distributed through a vertical profile in the atmosphere, basically meaning as you go up in the atmosphere, how is wind speed and direction changing, which gives you a good idea of how much shear there is. It can tell you something about the potential for tornadoes, it can tell you about the potential storm mode even. It can tell you something about the supercell type, whether that's high precipitation, low precipitation, or classic. It's a really robust chart, and I highly encourage you to understand it very well. So here's how you can practice with those charts. Basically, you want to find the tornado-friendly patterns for each of those charts. So just recognize the signals in the data. You don't really need to know the actual nuts and bolts of the chart to actually have a good idea of what's going on. For example, hodograph, the sickle shape is a very common shape with tornadic events. Basically, days that produce tornadoes tend to have a sickle shape. And if you see that in combination with the other three ingredients, watch out, you're likely to get tornadoes. Negative tilt trough, which you see at the upper air charts, very commonly associated with big events. By itself, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but with all the ingredients there, it can spell danger for areas downstream of it. So that's what I mean. That's how you practice. I would really recommend going again to SVC's page, maybe to some other archive pages, going through those old events and see what was needed for those events to come together. Admittedly, it's really hard to do this at first. It looks a bit like the Matrix. It's almost impossible to read and you don't know what you're looking at. But with time, you start noticing the patterns and you begin to read the Matrix. It's pretty awesome. Now, knowing the supercell ingredients is great. Knowing charts is great, but you need a repeatable process so that you don't miss anything while you're out in the field. Which brings us to step number 3, build your supercell forecasting process. Again, it's not enough to simply know how supercells form, the ingredients, and how to read weather charts. You really do need a good process because you need to be able to do this on the fly. When coverage is spotty, the roads are bumpy, you've got distractions, 10,000 things going on at the same time. So you need to be able to look at a chart quickly and determine where you need to go. And it can be handy to have your process laid out in a checklist, because if you have a checklist, you won't miss something along the way. I know this firsthand. I was chasing in Kansas along I-70 near Russell. I'd been there all day and we chased a supercell kind of close to 70 and it looks great. And then all of a sudden we start getting, thunderstorms forming. It gets pretty messy and I'm worried about it becoming squall line. Even though the ingredients are there for tornadoes, I think that maybe it's not looking so great. So I see a supercell develop to my south and it's looking beautiful. And so thinking through what was going on with our storm and what was going on with that storm, we said, oh gosh, this storm to the south looks a lot better. Let's go. And we left. And what did we forget? We forgot the cap. The cap was actually a lot stronger to the south than it was to the north, which was not something I had kept in mind. Again, the checklist, right? And the storm that we went towards ended up dissipating while the storm to the north produced an F3. So good to have a checklist. So how do you develop a good checklist or process? Well, you basically reverse engineer what's needed. So we know that tornadoes need spin and stretch, and supercells reliably produce spin and stretch. So if we can predict where supercells will form, then we know where tornadoes are likely to form. So then we need to know how do supercells come together, which is the supercell ingredients. And then so we say, okay, how much do we need of each and where, and which is more important? How do we weigh that? And so that's how you would kind of start thinking about developing your own process. And without a good process, you're going to make mistakes, which is going to cause you to bust. Unfortunately, it takes a long time to develop a good process, sometimes years and maybe even up to a decade before you finally get it all together, which can mean a lot of busting, a lot of money wasted, a lot of time wasted, missed opportunities, etc. That's actually why I created the Tornado Chaser Transformation course, which outlays my personal process for finding tornadoes and all the things I know about tornadoes. My entire playbook is in there. And if you're interested, you can check it out in the link in the description. But even if you can forecast where the tornadoes will be generally, you need to know within a storm where the tornado is going to be, which brings us to our next step. Step 4, decode supercell structure. Supercells are huge, sometimes 30 miles across. That's the distance between Dallas and Fort Worth. That's a lot of space in between. So it's not exactly self-evident that you can just find a tornado being next to a supercell with that much space in between. So you need to be able to pinpoint within that storm where the tornado is going to be. Obviously, we know that tornadoes tend to form on the southwest or western side of the storm, so that helps, narrows it down a bit. But sometimes you still get intervening rain curtains in between. So knowing how to view a tornado within rain curtains can be helpful. To help with this, find a tornado video. Any tornado video is fine. Just go to YouTube, pause it, and then try to guess where the videographer is looking. Like this one. What direction am I looking? Guess the direction. Feel free to comment below. I'll answer the comments. It's like field training from your couch. You can screw up safely from there, no hail damage required. And that will help you to understand more about what real tornadoes look like in real life, and that will set you up for success when you go out and actually chase. All right, now you know exactly where to find a tornado within a supercell, but how confident are you in your skills in terms of deploying them in the field, actually using them? And this brings us to our next step, step 5, virtual chase drills. To build your confidence before you spend a cent on gas, you can actually do something called virtual chasing. Basically means you try to simulate a real chase while you're at home and you have no danger from lightning or getting hit by a tornado, flat tire, whatever. It's pretty great. Here's how it works. So on any storm day, but let's say it's Storm Prediction Center slight risk or greater, pick where you're going to go to chase storms. Ideally, you want to do it the night before or the morning of before storms form, using your forecasting process, preferably. Then watch the storm unfold in real time on radar and then see what worked. Maybe you had a great forecast for the location of storm development, but you would have picked the wrong storm in real time because you didn't see a boundary or something of that nature. Going through this exercise hones your process and turns theory into muscle memory. And that helps you when you're out in the field. So maybe after 6 virtual chases, you're ready for the final step, which is to chase in the real world. Okay, so how do you decide when to chase? I'd recommend using the Storm Prediction Center's website. They issue convective outlooks daily, out to 8 days, and that should give you a pretty good baseline to make your forecast. Initially, you'll want to use SPC's forecast to calibrate your own. Simply put, they're the experts. They're really good at this stuff. They do this all the time, so it's unlikely you're ever going to beat them. So you'll want to use that on a real chase. However, that said, you're not going to get better at forecasting just leaning on them, so I'd recommend doing your own forecast and then comparing it against what they've done and seeing what you may have missed. The more times you do this, the better you'll get. And then when you're ready to chase, you can implement your own forecasting process. So in the morning, you can decide where to go, and then you arrive there, and then you recalibrate and figure out based upon satellite, on models, on analyses, where you might want to go to refine that forecast. Using radar, you can then decide on a target storm. And then when you drive up to the target storm, you know, generally speaking, where the tornado is going to be, and you've studied storm structure, so you know what to look for in terms of inflow bands and wall clouds and RFDs and all that stuff, and then you can position safely to get a great view. After the chase, I'd recommend evaluating your chase. What went right? What went wrong? Same thing as before. This really hones your process. Now, granted, it's really hard to have this kind of discipline, especially after an adrenaline-fueled day. But if you take it seriously and analyze it, you can become a great storm chaser fast. It just takes discipline. What chasing topic would you like to cover next? Drop it in the comments. And of course, if this was valuable to you, consider sharing it with another storm-obsessed friend, and maybe liking or subscribing. Thanks.